What would you do if the person who believed in you when no one else did was now struggling to survive? In 1996, Muhammad Ali got a phone call that broke his heart. His 81-year-old teacher, the woman who shaped his future, was living in poverty. What he did next was kept secret for years. No cameras, no headlines, just one unforgettable act that proved what real greatness looks like. The call that altered everything arrived on a frigid Chicago morning in November 1996. Muhammad Ali sat quietly in his study, his hands trembling, subtly, stubbornly, from the creeping grip of Parkinson's disease. This was the same man who once floated like a butterfly and struck like a bee. Now time had begun to collect its debt. On the other end of the line was Joe Martin, his first mentor, the man who had introduced a young boy named Cassius Clay to the discipline of boxing. What he said that morning would send the former champion on a quiet, deeply personal mission, one hidden from the world for years. "Champ," Joe began, his voice carrying a weight that cut through the static. "I heard something about Mrs. Sarah Johnson." The name landed heavily. Mrs. Sarah Johnson. In an instant, Ali was no longer a global icon. He was 8 years old again, sitting upright in a segregated classroom in Louisville's West End, watching a woman who had an uncanny gift not just for teaching, but for seeing. "She was your third-grade teacher," Joe continued, "the one who believed in you when you were just little Cassius." Ali exhaled slowly. "Of course I remember her." But what followed tightened something deep in his chest. "She's 81 now, living in a trailer park, struggling, too proud to ask for help. Folks say she's skipping meals to afford medicine." Silence. Only the sound of breath, labored, uneven. The woman who had sharpened his mind, who had nurtured his confidence, who had taught him that words could strike just as powerfully as fists, was living in quiet hardship, miles away from the life he now lived. Mrs. Johnson had been 35 when she first met young Cassius in 1950. Born in 1915, she came from a family that revered education despite the limitations placed on them. She fought her way through Kentucky State University, earning her teaching degree when the world expected very little from women like her. By the time Cassius entered her classroom, she had already become something rare, an educator with vision. Virginia Avenue Elementary was underfunded, overcrowded, equipped with cast-off materials. But inside her classroom, something remarkable happened. She created possibility. The walls were alive, with student artwork, powerful quotes, and images of Black excellence. She spent her own money on books, supplies, anything to give her students a fighting chance. And then there was Cassius. He stood out immediately, not just for his intelligence, but for his energy, his magnetism, his voice. Even then, it carried something different. Mrs. Johnson saw it, but more importantly, she protected it. She guided his restless energy, encouraged his early poetry, even when it was simple, found ways to make learning resonate. When math felt distant, she tied it to sports, to boxing, to rhythm. But her greatest gift wasn't instruction, it was belief. "You've got a light in you," she would tell him. "One day, the whole world will see it." Those words didn't fade. They stayed through every fight, every controversy, every victory. She taught more than academics. She taught dignity, self-respect, courage. During the early stirrings of the civil rights era, she introduced her students to figures like Frederick Douglass and George Washington Carver, reminding them that their story didn't begin with struggle, it began with strength. When Cassius left her class in 1951, she wrote something in his yearbook. "He will be famous someday. He has the heart of a champion and the soul of a poet." She kept everything he wrote, every poem, every paper, stored carefully in a simple folder for decades. But life, as it often does, became less kind with time. After retiring in 1975, Mrs. Johnson expected a modest but stable life. Instead, inflation eroded her pension. Expenses grew. Stability slipped away. Eventually, she sold her home and moved into a small trailer. Still, she carried herself with grace. Her home, though modest, was immaculate. On her wall hung photographs, students, memories, milestones, and one clipping, a young Cassius Clay, Olympic gold medalist. She never told anyone, never mentioned that she had taught one of the most famous men on earth, not out of secrecy, but dignity. When Joe's call ended, Ali didn't hesitate. "I'm going to Louisville," he said. Despite the warnings, the complications, the disease, she gave me everything when I had nothing. Weeks later, a quiet car pulled into a trailer park. No cameras, no headlines, just a man returning. Mrs. Johnson opened the door slowly and froze. There he stood, older, changed, but unmistakable. "Mrs. Johnson," he said softly, "it's me, Cassius." Her eyes filled. "Cassius, baby, is it really you?" For hours they talked, not as celebrity and teacher, but as student and guide. She brought out the folder, yellowed pages, fragile memories, his first poems, his early dreams, and as he held them, his hands unsteady, emotion overwhelmed him. This wasn't nostalgia, it was proof. Proof that someone had believed in him before the world ever did. He looked around, the small heater, the empty fridge, the nearly finished medicine bottle, details that spoke louder than words. "Why didn't you call me?" he asked gently. She smiled. "You had your own battles," then added softly, "You becoming who you were meant to be, that was enough for me." But for Ali, it wasn't enough. Not anymore. "You will never struggle again," he said, and he meant it. Within weeks, everything changed. A new home, medical care, financial security. But he didn't stop there. He created something bigger. A fund, quiet, deliberate, dedicated to helping retired teachers who had given everything and been forgotten. Mrs. Johnson became its first story, its foundation. Years later, when she passed at 86, her legacy had already begun to ripple outward. At her funeral, Ali spoke, his voice weakened, but his message clear. "She taught me that greatness isn't what you achieve, it's what you inspire." Because the truest victories don't happen in bright lights, they happen in small rooms, in quiet moments, where someone chooses to believe in you before anyone else does. And sometimes, the greatest champion isn't the one in the ring. It's the one in the classroom.
The room fell into a quiet stillness. Not awkward, just full, heavy with memory. Outside, the world kept moving. Cameras flashed somewhere, headlines waited to be written. But inside that modest apartment, time slowed to a gentle crawl. Ali leaned back slightly, breathing measured, eyes thoughtful. He wasn't the champion here, not really. He was a student again. Mrs. Johnson adjusted her glasses. Her voice softened, but it carried the same authority it always had. "Tell me something," she said. "When you stood in those rings, all those crowds, all that noise, did you ever feel afraid?" Ali smiled, faint but real. "Every time." A pause. "But you taught me something back then," he continued. "You said courage ain't about not being scared. It's about standing anyway." She nodded slowly, as if confirming a lesson well learned. They talked about everything, not just boxing, Not just fame, life. The kind of conversations that don't need an audience, the kind that shape a man long after the applause fades. At one point, Mrs. Johnson reached for a small, worn notebook. Its edges were frayed, pages yellowed with time. "I want you to read something," she said. Ali took it carefully. His hands, though unsteady, treated it like something sacred. It was another piece of his childhood, a short paragraph, messy handwriting, big dreams squeezed into small lines. He read silently, then again, slower. A quiet laugh escaped him. "I really wrote this?" "You did," she replied, "and you meant every word." Hours passed like minutes. Eventually, the light outside began to fade. Evening crept in softly, wrapping the room in a golden hush. Ali stood up slowly, reluctantly. "I don't want to leave," he admitted. Mrs. Johnson smiled, the kind of smile that understands more than it says. "You're not leaving," she said. "Not really."
Before he walked out, he paused at the door, turned back. There was something unfinished in the air. He stepped forward again, gently took her hand. "Thank you," he said. 2 simple words, but they carried decades inside them. From that day forward, things changed, quietly, intentionally. No press releases, no headlines, no spectacle, just action. Mrs. Johnson's life became easier, comfortable, dignified, the way it should have always been. But more than that, her story didn't end with her. It expanded. Ali made sure of that. The initiative he created wasn't just charity, it was acknowledgement, a recognition that behind every great figure there's someone unseen, someone who believed first, someone who planted the seed. Years later, when people spoke about Ali's legacy, they mentioned the fights, the titles, the poetry, the defiance. But those who knew spoke about something deeper. They spoke about loyalty, about memory, about a man who never forgot where he came from or who helped him get there. And somewhere, in a quiet space far from the roar of arenas, the real victory lived. Not in a ring, but in a classroom. Not in a knockout, but in a promise kept. The fund didn't simply exist, it evolved, quietly, purposefully, like the man behind it. Over time, the Muhammad Ali Education Fund became a lifeline for educators who had given everything and received far too little in return. Rent paid, prescriptions filled, heat restored in winter, dignity returned. No headlines, no grandstanding, just impact. And at the center of it all remained one name, Mrs. Sarah Johnson. Muhammad Ali never forgot the small classroom where it all began, never forgot the woman who saw brilliance in a boy the world overlooked. That memory stayed sharp even as his body weakened. Years passed, seasons changed, yet every so often Ali would arrive, unannounced, unpublicized, sitting across from his old teacher, not as a global icon, but as Cassius, the boy she believed in. They talked, slowly, deeply, about books, about life, about purpose. And in those quiet exchanges, something remarkable endured, respect that time couldn't erode. Mrs. Johnson's influence began to ripple outward again, through the fund, through the teachers it supported, through the students they continued to shape, her voice echoing in classrooms she would never see. When she passed in 2001, the loss was felt far beyond Louisville, but her story didn't end there. At her funeral, Ali stood, frail yet resolute, his voice unsteady, but his message clear. Greatness isn't measured in titles. It's measured in impact, in who you lift, in who you believe in who you refuse to forget. The room fell silent, because everyone understood.
this wasn't just a goodbye. It was a full circle. Today, inside Virginia Avenue Elementary School, a small exhibit stands, modest, powerful. Inside it, aged papers, faded ink, and a manila folder that once held the dreams of a young boy. Proof that belief, when given at the right moment, can echo across decades. And somewhere in that story, between a teacher who gave everything and a student who gave it back, the true meaning of a champion reveals itself. Not in the roar of the crowd, but in the quiet act of remembering.